Hi again, welcome back. This is the third of what will probably be 4 presentations on system engineering measurement. This one's a little different. This is not one of my personal papers, but it's a presentation on a working group guide, specifically the Measurement Working Group, that we published this guide, Project Manager's Guide to Systems Engineering Measurement for Project Success, published in 2015. It is available in the INCOSE Store. The soft copy is free for INCOSE members. Primary authors were myself, Paul Friends, who was the Measurement Working Group Chair, Beth O'Donnell was also the primary contributor. And this was presented at one of our informational sessions at the International Symposium in 2015. And this is a summary of the guide. That is what I'm going to go through today. So with that, let me continue. The cover in the INCOSE Store is a little bit different than what you see here. It's got a picture on it, but it's still version 1, published in March of 2015. Our objective was to provide a beginner's guide to project managers. Specifically, what would we like project managers to be measuring with respect to their projects from a system engineering perspective, even if they don't know very much about systems engineering or they don't have system engineering leaders, and specific help for system engineering leaders on larger projects for high leverage measures. So it's not comprehensive compared with the rest of the literature, but we thought this would be useful for project managers and other project leaders. Our approach was to keep it short and relatively simple, to use project manager language. We had this reviewed by several PMPs during the development and finalization. And we wanted to keep the system engineering measurement in the context of concerns about project managers. Primarily is going to be about cost and schedule, but we wanted them to understand how technical risk is going to affect cost and schedule and their ability to finish their projects. We also wanted to enable the project managers to find what they needed and identify important few measures, not all the possibilities. So these are our recommendations. We included references to other INCOSE and industry work, and this guide is referenced in the System Engineering Handbook in one of the tables in the measurement section, along with several of those industry references, the ISO standards and so forth. There's 6 chapters. There's a brief introduction about what the guide is about, discussion of measurement in general, what we're focusing on. Chapter 3 is a quick start guide, how to use and quickly get value out of using the guide. Chapter 4 is a discussion of technical debt, and I've referenced this in a prior LinkedIn post or comment. Then chapter 5 is where we present roughly 10 technical measures that can be used throughout the life cycle, and I'll be going through those in a little more detail. And chapter 6 is a very readable, notional, euphemistic case study to see how one might apply the various measures throughout the life cycle of a project. So that we think would be very useful. So how's this different? It's, as I said, it's not comprehensive from a system engineering perspective. Rather, we're trying to identify what we felt were a few important high leverage measures that would be of value to project managers who might not even look at some of the industry standard material on system engineering measurement, like the primer, the leading indicators, the technical measurement guide, or even the system engineering handbook. The industry standard is the ISO 15939, which was originally developed for software measurement, expanded to systems engineering measurement as well. We're not trying to replicate any of that. We're trying to identify specific measures that we think would be useful for project managers. Chapter 2 is an introduction to systems engineering measurement, just to get people oriented. So we identify the importance of product measures, and this is a graphic that comes right out of the System Engineering Measurement Primer. The focus on closed-loop feedback control and measurement as an important part of that in order to manage process execution. So you can see this, a discussion of this in the INCOSE System Engineering Measurement Primer. But we are focusing our work in this guide on relatively important product measures as well as some process measures. And you can see some discussion of that in the prior presentation I did on correlating product and process measures. The Quick Start Guide was intended to identify questions and answers of interest to the project managers. And so these are the questions that are placed there. What should I measure? What gets measured gets done. Or as I learned early in my Boeing career, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. What should I measure? You should measure what's critical to making your program successful. And there's a set of tables to help you select from among the possibilities, using the characteristics of a specific project, the kinds of measures that might be most useful. And I'll show you that in a bit. And how do you measure with a minimum budget to achieve the most? So this is effectiveness. You find the critical few measures that give you the most insight into the areas of highest risk where you need to provide control and feedback control on what you're doing. So measures that aren't going to affect what you're doing are not worth measuring. On the other hand, there may be a critical few that are extremely important. A question that we addressed, what do I do when data are disputed by members of the project team? Dr. Edward Deming, In God We Trust, all others bring data. So trust the data first. And then you can analyze why are the data the way they are and why are they being questioned. But we begin with the data. So those are some questions that we felt we wanted to address from the perspective of project managers. The Quick Start Guide orients tables like this that you'll see in Chapter 5, the specific measures. When might a specific measure be most appropriate? So there's measurement categories, what phase of the life cycle, is there development strategy, tools or databases that are being used, product domain, and staff capability, extending from novice to very experienced or experienced but in a new domain. And so applicable factors relate to technical quality, size, complexity, stability, and schedule. So these are, and anything that's colored in, that means it's probably relevant for the specific measure that's being considered. Now you could make the argument that all measures are probably applicable to any project. So we've done some assessment and try and identify when they are most appropriate, but you could make an argument that any of the measures can be used for any project. Chapter 4 is an extended discussion on technical debt to help project managers think more carefully about kicking the can down the road and incurring technical risk as a result of what's going on and hoping that things are going to turn out well. So the focus is on identifying technical risk using language that they're familiar with, like schedule and budget problems. So we identify some example measures that can be used to help manage technical debt, like problem report status aging, You had problem reports that were open, but nothing's happening with them, or there are action items that aren't getting resolved. Those are examples of technical debt. It's defined as the promise to complete a technical shortcoming in the future while declaring it complete enough today. And the trap, like personal debt, is that deferring a technical challenge or risk to the future because you don't want to address it just means you're going to probably have a bigger problem in the future. We don't want to resolve that issue now, so we will ignore it until it becomes critical. And that's the technical debt. So being able to identify technical risk that we are currently incurring and figuring out a plan to resolve that. And this guide is to help project managers identify technical debt so that they can face it and deal with it. Technical debt is commonly incurred in one of three ways. By omission, we simply didn't account for something within the schedule or budget. So something doesn't get done. So we don't know about something, or some work's not being accomplished. Second one is what we call wishful thinking, that tasks are declared completed, but they're not really complete. And we see that in earned value management, where you start considering the quality of the work completed, but it really wasn't completed appropriately. And I discussed this in the first measurement presentation on performance-based earned value. And then undetected rework. Task believed to be completed but done incorrectly. And that's a form of technical debt because you may not find out about it for a while until some downstream customer or user of that work figures out that it's not done correctly and or it's incomplete, and therefore there's rework that has to be done or additional work that has to be done. So these are three different ways that technical debt can be incurred. How to avoid and measure technical debt? Well, you have to address each of those issues, account for unscheduled tasks, establish measures to provide early warning about unscheduled or incomplete or incorrectly completed tasks, and then provide cost account manager training so that we properly account for earning value. And again, I addressed this in the performance-based earned value presentation that's on the YouTube channel, the first of the system engineering measurement papers. Chapter 5 is the specific measures that we're recommending be considered. There are 10 identified, and on each of the pages, there's a quick start guide table to help you figure out whether this one would be appropriate for the characteristics of the project that you have. A short explanation about what it means, how to use it, and why there's benefit. Now, typically there's an example spreadsheet or other reference so that one can view what we think it ought to look like. There may be a reference in the footnote, and there's a specific description of the measure in the right-hand column. So all 10 pages look like this, and I'll go through them one at a time. The list is here. Several have to do with schedule late starts and late completions, problem report aging, technical uncertainty reduction, scope change, which is the language that project managers often use for requirements changes or requirements volatility, technology readiness and maturity level, solution satisfies requirements. This was one of the important measures that we identified in the performance-based earned value presentation. Technical performance, which is a historically important one, well known, counts, and more importantly, stability of system elements. reliability, maintainability, and availability. It's a predictor of future O&M problems or even during verification. And defect containment, which is a common one in software development. So I'm going to go through these one at a time. Chapter 6 is case studies. For a short mythical project, it covers programmatic and technical measures. It walks through the measurement selection process, what should we be using, demonstrates how to use and interpret various measures with associated corrective actions, provides rationale and use of weekly and monthly measures, and shows how to employ appropriate measures at different stages of the life cycle. So that's coverage of the whole guide. Measures selection. We have several programmatic measures to start with: schedule performance index, cost performance index, that come from earned value management, risk matrix. So programmatic measures, CPI, SPI, are probably well known to project managers. Program risk assessment is a useful measure for assessing how we're doing in terms of incurring programmatic risk, whether regard to schedule or cost or technical activities. And so we pay attention to these. Measures selection, system measures for inch stones, for weekly measures associated with schedule progress, requirements volatility, requirements verification percentage, technical performance measures. So these are some of the measures identified in the case study. So now to all of the measures that are listed in Chapter 5. Schedule, late starts and late completions. So having a graphic that shows how you're doing over time and cumulative performance, so you can see what your plan is versus how you're doing. The idea is that late starts are a leading indicator for late finishes, but there's a caution about starting tasks when you don't have sufficient information or your information is incomplete, because that likely means you're going to have rework, a form of technical debt, because you began without all of the necessary prerequisites. So that's the first one on late starts and late completions with weekly tracking. Second one is on problem report aging and peer reviews. So the problem is delayed resolution of problems or review of technical information may accumulate more technical debt and may indicate that critical decisions are being delayed, and that's going to jeopardize the schedule. So histograms work well because we can count by time period, a delay period, how many problem reports or action items are actually in each group, and investigate then what we can do about that, why we're having the problem, why can't we get these issues worked, and analyze what the impact is going to be. Similarly for peer reviews, if things are being delayed, what can we do about that? One we introduced that I haven't seen too many other places is technical uncertainty reduction. So project managers have an important job of making decisions to keep the project moving forward. Often it's an inability to make decisions arises from uncertainty. So this is a measure to identify and track parameter uncertainty and its relationship to decision making. So we realize that we'll never have perfect information, but if we can decide up front that if, for example, we know a particular parameter, and this could be schedule for something, within 3%, then we are able to make a decision with acceptable risk for whatever the outcomes might be. So we can create a plan and then track it to the threshold and say, okay, once we get the parameter uncertainty below that threshold level, then we will be able to make a decision and move forward. Technical people prefer to have perfect information and not make decisions with any uncertainty, but we know that's not realistic. So this is a way of making this problem visible in a form that we think project managers can live with in order to be able to make decisions and move forward. So uncertainty reduction tracking. A very familiar one, requirements volatility. It's often measured and not as often used to make decisions. In the project manager language, it's often called scope change. So we need to be aware of when are requirements changing a lot, when should they be changing a lot, and when should they not be changing a lot. Ahead of, for example, a system requirements review, we would expect volatility to be high, but it has to immediately settle down. And certainly by the time you get to critical design reviews, you shouldn't have any requirements changes. So this allows you to see future potential impacts of requirements changes on incurring technical debt. Technology readiness levels or maturity levels, and this can be applied to manufacturing readiness as well. This is a well-known measurement that's very useful to recognize that we are at more technical risk of beginning programs when we have relatively immature technology. At the time I was working at Boeing, most customers said they didn't want any projects with a technology readiness level 6 or less, depending on the program. And the preference is clearly on things that have 7 or above, meaning it's been demonstrated to some degree. So this is important to recognize that what are our technology readiness levels for all the different systems and subsystems in order to be able to focus effort or decide that we need to change the specific technology we are planning on. This is a measure so the solution satisfies the requirements or percent compliance that arose out of our 2008 paper that is in the YouTube channel. This is, to me, a key progress measurement for development programs because it's an evaluation of the degree to which the design is satisfying the requirements. And it can be measured at any time. Certainly at system requirements review, you have an idea of the future implementation, but one must have some idea of whether the requirements being described are feasible. And so you may have an assessment as to compliance, but there should be some sort of an assessment. In our 2008 paper, we described 3 levels of assessment, 3 risk levels of assessment. Here we only identify one is in the green, but one should pay attention to known non-compliance because that's an issue, or unknown compliance. That's some degree of risk because you don't know whether your potential solutions are going to be compliant. So that incurs technical debt. And there's a big jump up in the number of requirements baselined. So we go from system level to subsystem and lower levels at preliminary design review. That's an expected jump in requirements. The blue section indicates that we've completed verification for particular requirements. And so the risk, if that's actually done properly, should be pretty much 0 for those requirements. And that's ultimately where we want to be at when we complete FCA, all compliance for functional requirements, and PCA, physical configuration audit, for the totality of not only functional but physical requirements and build requirements. Technical performance measurement is discussed in the System Engineering Handbook, Technical Measurement Guide, Leading Indicators Guide, and it's simply a means to track expected performance or known performance versus a plan to achieve what's needed ultimately for a particular parameter, whether it's range or cost or reliability, something like that. And the failure to achieve the required progress converts the risk to an issue because it says we're not working according to plan, so we need to do something to modify the plan. So this is a well understood one that should be used regularly. We included one for counts of system elements, but really the more important issue is stability. If we have volatility of numbers of interfaces, especially external interfaces, that suggests there's something going on that's going to have a downstream impact. Like we've identified, there are new external systems. Well, they may bring either new constraints or new interfaces, so there may be cascading effects. So tracking this early may help one identify future problems related to requirements or interface definition or design activity. So being able to identify numbers of things and track their stability early on can be a leading indicator of future issues that may arise. So counts and stability of system elements of various kinds. Number 9 is about reliability, maintainability, and availability. We can begin tracking this once we get our systems into integration and verification. We don't have to wait for operations, but we should begin accumulating information because these will be predictors of how things are going to work out in operation and whether we're actually going to meet system availability requirements based on reliability and maintainability measures accumulated during integration and verification activity. So a time-dependent line chart is very useful for tracking this, beginning early on as soon as we have some integration and verification activity ongoing. And the last one is about defect containment, which is pretty well understood in software development, but it has to do with identifying how well we are identifying defects, problems, elements of the system not satisfying their requirements or other things, and how long it takes to identify them by phase, design, requirements, design, build, verify, because the impact on the project in terms of rework and schedule impact is known to be large if we discover defects during verification compared with discovering them during requirements development. So most defects tend to be relatively straightforward to fix if we discover them in the requirements phase, but requirements defects that aren't discovered until verification can have a huge impact. So defect containment is a good way to track and identify technical debt before it gets out of hand. So those are the 10 measures that were identified in the guide, and we hope that they will be useful for you. So a couple more slides on applying these measures. So system measures that were indicated in the case study. I guess I got these a little bit out of order. Weekly monitoring, late starts and stops. As I said, best leading indicator of a late stop is a late start. The system measures related to requirements volatility, we want to see those go to 0 ahead of CDR. And requirements compliance, we want to see that become mostly known compliant early on as we complete each phase of our requirements development and technical reviews. Other system measures associated with technical performance measures. Size, for example, we have an upper limit, we have a plan line, we have an upper threshold, and we want to make sure that we're tracking so that we can be successful ultimately. Or uncertainty, tracking uncertainty so that we can make decisions, and we may have, for example, power dissipation uncertainty, which affects things like power supply, heat, cooling. And so we know we need to have a firm decision by a certain date, and we need the threshold below some number by a certain date. So we want to make sure that our uncertainty is falling in line with the plan. Requirements verification measures. How are we doing with respect to plan? These are often used. We want to make sure that we stay on the plan so we don't get behind. Otherwise, we're eventually expecting a miracle to occur, if you will. So those are some other system measures that were identified in the case study in Chapter 6. So this guide is available in the INCOSE Store. The soft copy is free to INCOSE members. And I'm not sure exactly what the INCOSE Store looks like with respect to this guide. I do know the cover is slightly different. I'm not sure about the pricing, so forgive me for that because I haven't updated this slide for that, but you must be logged in as an INCOSE member to get the discount. And with that, I appreciate your attention, and I wish you well in applying your measures and your thinking to manage technical debt on your project and help your projects be successful. Thank you very much for your attention.